Welcome to Voices for Energy Justice, a podcast series produced by Uniting the Central Coast for Action, a program of the San Luis Obispo Climate Coalition.
Shalonda Baker's visionary book, Revolutionary Power, provides two critical insights. One, we cannot address climate change without also taking on environmental justice. Two, the powers of the status quo will try to divide climate activists and the energy justice community. Overcoming this is the key to achieving the energy future we all deserve.
Shalonda Baker also discussed the origin of the solar cost shift, an argument created by the utilities over 10 years ago to combat customer-based solar installations. This cost shift is a myth that is being used to divide the environmental and energy justice communities while advancing the utilities' objective of preserving their centralized energy generation business model. Listen in as John Smigelski interviews Richard McCann, founding partner of M.Cubed, which provides economic and policy consulting services to public and private sector clients. Richard's analysis debunks this cost shift argument.
Yeah, so they seem to be asserting that customers are required to pay the full retail rate, including the electricity they generate themselves. The analogy here is to think about a grocery store and somebody growing vegetables in their garden. Does the grocery store charge you the retail rate for the vegetables that you grow in your garden? Well, of course not.
Richard, thank you for joining us to discuss your recent analysis debunking the myth of the solar cost shift. Can you tell me a bit about your background and what brought you to this work?
So my pathway isn't exactly direct to where I ended up on this analysis. I've been in consulting for almost 40 years. I've testified in, I think, roughly 60 different rate cases around the country. I also do water and environmental consulting as well. So I have a water contract with San Luis Obispo County that I'm working on. I was doing work on for the agricultural interest. Farmers have a large group of, many of them have solar arrays that serve multiple parcels. And so they got involved in the most recent NEM 3.0 proceeding, which I think many of your listeners probably are aware of. It changed the way that rooftop solar customers are compensated. And I did a piece of analysis that the California Solar and Storage Association caught wind of, and they saw what I had done in terms of looking at how resources are displaced by distributed solar. And they asked me to look into this further about this cost shift argument, which has been an increasing cry by the utility industry. It's actually not happening just in California. I've been involved in at least 3 other states where the same argument is being raised. And so they reached out to me, and I started working with the CALSA about 6 months ago, digging into this analysis more deeply, and then came up with a report that we issued in, I think, November that about responding to the claims of a cost shift.
The California Public Utility Commission's Public Advocates Office released the fact sheet about this cost shift along with their calculating methodology. And, it showed that customer-sided PV or solar installations will shift $8 billion in cost to other customers in 2024. And their fact sheet recommends changes to the treatment of existing NEM 1 and NEM 2 customers. And your analysis shows customers actually saved other customers over $2 billion this year. So that's really quite a difference. So let's start by talking about the Public Advocates Office and what their role is.
So the Public Advocates Office, or PAO, as we're calling them, they actually use a shorthand of Cal Advocates, but it takes the same amount of words as saying public advocates. So I just go PAO. So their role is to act as ratepayer advocates for small customers like residential and small businesses who can't really afford to intervene directly at the Public Utilities Commission on their own. And there's another organization, TURN, which represents residential ratepayers, which covers much of the same ground. So the PAO and Turn often have very similar positions in the various rate proceedings. And the PAO, one of their jobs is actually to dig into utility filings and determine if those rate requests are justified by the utilities going forward. They also work on how revenues and costs are allocated among customers. So, and they represent, as I said, residential and small business customers in that position. So in this case, they are basically going after a program that they believe is benefiting a small set of customers at the expense of other customers. And that's what their justification for putting this filing out there is about. But really, to be honest, we think that they are looking for a scapegoat for their own failings in the regulatory process over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, one of the issues that seems to jump out of the study is how they view electricity that a customer's PV system generates for use in the home. Could you elaborate with your view and why you're putting in opposition to it?
Yeah, so they seem to be asserting that customers are required to pay the full retail rate for all of the electricity they consume, including the electricity they generate themselves. And it's based on a false premise that these customers are basically leaving the system after already investments have been made on their behalf in the system. And that's actually not true. When we look at the data and look at the analysis, what I did is I went back and looked at a forecast in 2005 by the California Energy Commission of forecasted load increases over the next 20 years. And I found that there was going to be they have predicted a forecast peak load that was going to be 15,000 megawatts or 65,000 megawatts above what the current load is today. And when we look at the amount of solar that has been rooftop solar that's been installed over this time, it's about 15,000 megawatts, a little bit less. And so it really looks like rooftop solar has displaced a huge amount of what would otherwise be needed investment in generation and transmission and distribution. And about half of the generation that these customers make is used internally for themselves. It's not exported to anybody. They aren't getting compensated for it in any way. And the PAO is asserting that they actually owe the utility the full retail rate for the electricity that they paid for and generated themselves. And essentially, this is actually what they're saying is the utility owns the output from your asset, and please pay us in this. But there's no legal basis for this claim. It's also not ethical. Some people have said, well, we have sunk costs that we have to recover, and we need to spread the costs over a bigger group of people as their assertion. But that really undermines the basis for how people made an investment in what was a really cutting edge technology and a technology that had a risk. So Severin Bornstein, who from UC Berkeley, who has been a strong critic of rooftop solar, wrote in 2008 an article that said rooftop solar customers are going to lose their shirts because it was going to be more expensive to have the rooftop solar than to buy electricity from the utility. And of course, he's really wrong. And I have to admit, actually around 2013, I was doing a study for a customer who had a mobile home park and was looking at installing community solar to serve their park. And I said, well, I don't know if this is really cost effective for you. It's kind of risky. And people were taking a risk in investments. And yes, it paid off, but that's kind of what happens in the world. It's some people invest in some things and they lose money, and some people invest money and they make money, and some people invest in utilities and they're guaranteed to make money.
Yeah.
So,
The
uh,
highest amount possible allowed by any utility in the country is a guaranteed rate of return here in California. Yeah, it's strikingly remarkable that the Public Advocate's Office calls the electricity that a solar system generates an incentive that this customer is getting, and it's I don't know. I have a solar system. I don't get any incentives for the generation I produce. I pay for my system, and I think I should benefit from what it produces and I generate and supply into my house. Once it leaves
yeah,
that's a whole nother issue.
right.
But
Well, I just think the analogy here is the simplest one is to think about a grocery store and somebody growing vegetables in their garden. Does the grocery store charge you the retail rate for the vegetables that you grow in your garden? Well, of course not, because you grew them yourself and you paid for the fertilizer and soil and everything else that goes into the growing that vegetables, and you never asked for anything from the grocery store. Now, you go to the grocery store to buy vegetables, but you pay for the vegetables because you were delivered those vegetables. And this is the same situation here is you make your own energy, you get to keep it, you don't pay anyone for it. And when you do need energy, you pay the utility for that energy. And the other analogy, which is a little bit more on point, is cell phone service. So when you get a cell phone plan, you can switch to another cell phone company. Sometimes they have a 12-month commitment. If you have like a multi-year commitment, it's not for the cell phone service, it's for the phone you bought. And you can buy your way out of the plan by paying off the rest of the phone part of the plan and then leave and go to another provider. There's no exit fee. There's no obligation that you have to pay for having switched from T-Mobile to AT&T. You know, that you're done once you switch. That's all of this. There's not really anything I can think of where somebody has to pay for something that they're producing themselves in order to compensate another producer for something not delivered to them.
yeah, it's quite upside down. Another area of significant difference is that the public advocates use the avoided cost calculator tool to calculate the savings solar customers provide other customers. Why do you think this is an adequate way to assess the value of solar customers to the California grid?
Well, there's two particular problems. One is the avoided cost calculator they use is actually undervalues the forward value of rooftop solar, but I'm not going to get into that issue in particular. That's kind of another battle to fight. Um, but in the case of the existing customers, what they've done is they've completely ignored the savings created to date by having rooftop solar on the system. And the reason why is they didn't even think about the fact that there might have been displaced generation purchases or displaced transmission and distribution investments over the last 20 years from having this solar. And that's why when I did my analysis and found that the peak load had been reduced by about the same amount as the installed solar capacity, and the peak still is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which is near peak output for solar. When you look at that, those savings add up to several $billion more than what the Public Advocates Office says. So just on the side, if you take out the self-generation out of their number, that's about $4 billion that comes out of there. So we now have gone from 8.5 billion down to 4.5 billion. And then when you incorporate the historic savings that have reduced utility rates today, our utility rates would be much higher than they are today if we don't account for this. That's another $2+ billion in savings. And then there's the last $2 billion in which they made some miscalculations in their rate calculations. And I can talk about a couple other savings too that even take the savings from beyond zero. The savings are actually roughly 2.3 billion by our calculation.
Yeah, I think you pointed out that they seem to be ignoring the monthly bill payments made by solar customers that cover some of the fixed costs. and these seem fairly significant. How much did the public advocates miss with this issue?
So what they tried to say is, well, we're only looking at the rooftop solar aspect of these impacts, and we're only looking at the generation and what the obligations are associated only with the generation and that consumption, the offsetting consumption. The problem is that they do have the imports. So what they've done is they've arbitrarily drawn a line around customer usage that actually includes a gray area of imported power that comes in that customers get a credit for that consumption as part of the net energy metering. You export a certain amount, you get a credit for it when it comes back in. So they already are accounting for, or they already include energy that is imported into the customers that the customers consume. But why do they draw the line there? They need to include all of the energy that is consumed by a customer, not some arbitrary line. And when you do that, it turns out these customers on average pay about $80 to $160 a month in monthly bills, which is pretty close to the average bill for all customers in the system. And once you go, there's a variable cost part of the bill that you pay. There's the generation that you buy from the generators, and there's some future avoided costs that are included. And if I just use the numbers that the PAO has calculated for those variable costs, the remaining fixed cost contribution is about $70 a month by these customers. Well, PG&E says the fixed cost contribution for each customer should be $50 a month. So these customers are already paying almost 50% more towards fixed costs than what the average customer is paying, and what PG&E says are the fixed costs. And the fixed costs do not vary by customer. A fixed cost is a cost that is independent of energy usage. Any other definition is wrong about what a fixed cost is. And so these customers are already paying their share and more of the fixed costs for PG&E on a per customer basis. Yet the PAO ignores that. Now, on top of that, there's going to be a fixed charge that's going to be imposed on all of us. For people who are not on a care or on a FARA rate are going to pay $24 a month starting sometime in 2025. So that's already going to collect a certain amount of money towards those fixed costs that these customers are supposed to be paying for. And it's not clear how it will fit in with the $70 a month amount, but regardless, these customers are already contributing a substantial amount towards these utility costs and more than their fair share, or their average share at least, and mostly their fair share, because there's a report that came out yesterday from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab looking at the profile of rooftop solar customers. And what they found is that the median income of a rooftop solar customer is only 7% higher than the median of all single-family homeowners. So basically, a solar rooftop customer is almost exactly an average customer in this whole thing. So a fair allocation is just on a percent basis for everyone.
Interesting. So you also point out that a fair number of solar customers are part of the CARE program for limited income customers, and this seemed to be ignored by the public advocates. And how does this distort the analysis?
They did it in two ways. One is when they calculated the average rate of that was being avoided basically by these customers, this is at the root of their calculation. What they did is they just took total solar generation and multiplied by an average retail rate, and then subtracted out the avoided cost calculator amount for that energy. That's the very simple analysis that they did. When they calculated that average rate, they ignored care customers. Yet care customers are 15% of the rooftop solar owners. And those customers get a 32% discount off their rate right now. That reduces by quite a bit the amount of that $8.5 billion that they had calculated. So that's one part of the problem that they did in their calculation. The second part, which is one of these elements that actually pushes the benefits beyond zero, that makes the benefits very positive, is that other customers do not need to pay us the care subsidy support payment for care customers who are self-generating because they already bought their system. They're generating themselves. Nobody's giving them a subsidy for using their own generation. And that amount is about $700 million a year that we have relieved the burden on other customers for having to pay a care subsidy. And they had something in their response that said something about, well, you're ignoring care customers' lack of contribution to fixed costs or something like that. But they already, I know I don't follow that logic because they even ignored care customers entirely in their rate calculation. So they actually overestimated the amount of contribution that the care customers would be making to fixed costs in their calculation. So we're just correcting that problem with that calculation. And I would the by the way, the contribution towards fixed costs for all other customers is about $1.4 billion a year. And that's also one of the net benefits that goes beyond zero, getting to zero. It really is, that's part of that benefit.
So you mentioned the public advocate response to your analysis. What else did they have to say?
So they kind of danced around things. That's one of the things that one of the key points where they were really wrong was that they claimed that rates are set on a forward-looking basis. I guess that theoretically, yes, there's a test year that they do when they do the rate setting at the PUC, where they take a forecast of next year's rates, revenue requirements, and the utilities are authorized to spend up to that amount, but it's only 1 year ahead. It's really, most of those costs are actually recovery of past investments. So like their hydropower plants and their existing wires for transmission and for distribution, and actually for Diablo Canyon, they have those additional costs there, which you folks are all really familiar with. Those costs are then allocated using forward-looking costs, but the base of the rates themselves are based on historic accumulated costs. And so if you want to look at what impact existing customer investments have had on utility revenue requirements, you need to look at how those past costs have changed because of that investment. And so that's the case where we went in and looked at the projected cost of building new generation capacity. What were the renewable power contracts that were avoided by having this generation? What kind of current power generation costs are avoided? What transmission costs were avoided based on what the average retail rate is? It's actually kind of a lowball estimate of that. And we used a lowball estimate of the avoided distribution costs based on historic incremental costs that the utilities themselves used in setting rates. So all of this, we came up with that estimate. It's about over $2 billion. I think I mentioned about the avoided historic investment. And that's actually a low end estimate because the transmission and distribution investment numbers are probably too low.
Well, it seems like they didn't challenge the core of your critique, which is about a $10 billion number, and they seems like to be pointing on the edges of that.
Yeah. Yes, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get at trying to argue by attacking the principles rather than the calculations themselves, and they don't really quite understand actually completely the principles that they're using themselves in this. And I think that pointing out that they are, for example, asserting that utilities own the entire output of your solar panel is something that they did not really address. They were just trying to make a moral argument that, well, everybody should have to pay towards sunk costs.
Yeah, when I look at their analysis, one thing that is not clear to me is like how are they treating customers that have already departed the utilities and gone to the CCAs? Because for PG&E, that's about 60% of the load, and CCAs in general treat solar customers better than the utility in terms of their net any surplus generation. So you would think a lot of them have already left. So it's kind of hard to see, is that another it almost seems like they try to calculate an output as high as possible with some of the errors they made to try and, make this shift as high as possible for a potential policy change. At least that's my impression.
Well,
Um,
there's certainly it's true doing that. I've worked on CCA issues as well. I testified for them for a few years at the Public Utilities Commission. And what there is in that case, there's an exit fee, which is the PCIA, which I can't remember what that acronym exactly means. So I'm gonna
Power charge indifferent adjustment.
yes. Oh, well, you got it down. So they do that calculation based on what historic investments have been made in the utility portfolio, and then argue that those costs should be shared back between CCA customers and bundled customers. Um, there's some problems with that analysis and also the principles behind it, but they do have that exit fee. But the big difference with CCAs and with the rooftop solar customers is the CCAs basically carved out a set of existing customers and existing loads without there wasn't a load growth that they were taking over initially. They just moved in and took over. So there is some justification that there's some kind of compensation that should be owed by the CCAs to the utilities. Whether the PCIA is the right compensation, I would dispute because I testified on that in 2017. I think they did it wrong. But even so, that's different than rooftop solar customers because the rooftop solar customers freed up resources for new loads in the way that they produce new generation. So they basically are behind the reduction in the state's peak load over the last 20 years. They're a big component of it. And so when you're avoiding new resources, there's nothing about compensation there. You just need to say thank you
Yeah.
and move on.
Yes. Thank you for investing your money for
Yes,
us. Yeah.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, basically, just to put a fine point on it is that since about half of your rooftop solar generation, you're using it yourself and you invested your money in that, the and other customers did not have to pay for that, they basically got that resource for free. The other customers did. They got a brand new generation for free because you paid for it and you're not asking them to pay for it.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I just didn't know whether there's some double counting going on that is with the CCAs, but you really clarified that up quite a bit. Uh, do you have any closing? We'll provide a link to the study for people at the end of this podcast. But Richard, do you have any closing comments or additional details you'd like to bring out?
Well, let me just the CCA analogy. Actually, there's a better analogy to talk about, which is energy efficiency. So we've had a very strong state policy about encouraging energy efficiency. We have appliance and building standards that far exceed just about any other state. We've been a leader in those sorts of issues for years. It turns out that we've saved tens of thousands of gigawatt hours of power in energy efficiency. So I took the PAO's spreadsheet and I went back in and put in the estimated energy efficiency numbers that the California Energy Commission has compiled in terms of total savings. And when I put those numbers in, the cost shift, according to the PAO's analysis, would be $18 billion. Yet we don't hear anything about them wanting to go out and tax customers who bought an energy efficient refrigerator or have a more efficient air conditioner or put in insulation in their house or built a new house that was under Title 24 compliance or any of those other things. They do not go after people saving energy or even people who decide that they're going to turn down their thermostats, so they run their air conditioning at 78 or 82 degrees instead of at 72 degrees, or they, turn their heat down to 68 or 64 degrees instead. Those are all things where they are saving electricity. Or actually, people who replaced incandescent light bulbs with LED light bulbs, right? That's a huge savings. Why aren't we taxing those people for making those decisions that have imposed a revenue shift burden on everybody else? Because they didn't. They saved all of us money. They all saved us money because they made those investments. Rooftop solar is exactly the same. Somebody made an investment that saved energy use for everyone else, and we should be giving them credit and not trying to pursue them. They've been told they have a 20-year life on the tariff. And sure, when they get to the end of that 20 years, there's going to be some new rate that they're going to face, however it's designed. But you need to give them the full credence of that commitment that the state made. Jerry Brown even wrote a letter in 2013 committing to having that tariff in place for the life of the panels. So I don't know how much more explicit you can get to making a commitment. It's unethical to try to go back and demand a change in the deal. I don't see the other big thing is that we have a bunch of renewable power contracts that were signed that were overpriced and overly long by the utilities. That's why the PCIA is so high for the CCAs. They signed a bunch of 20 and 30-year contracts for solar at 12 cents a kilowatt hour or even higher, that they should have actually signed 10-year deals. And if they had signed 10-year deals, they would be gone because it's about 10 years since they signed those deals. And where is the effort by the PAO to go back and redo those deals? We actually had an opportunity in 2019. PG&E, in its bankruptcy proceeding, could have abrogated every single renewable contract and forced them to come back and renew it as a right under Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They refused to do that. They renegotiated a couple of contracts that hadn't yet been finished, but they left all of the committed contracts in place. Why did they do that? Well, because they needed to have credibility with the generators to sign future contracts. That's why. And they need to do the same thing if they want to have credibility with customers to make the investments we need in order to electrify our economy and to reduce our emissions and save our climate.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's gosh, I have something very clever to say at the end here, but I don't right now. We'll have to edit this. We'll edit this part out. No, but I couldn't agree more. It's like, why attack something that's providing benefits to all of us? And
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
never felt when I turned a light bulb off, I was costing other people money. I thought I was doing a good thing for the environment.
yeah. Well, unfortunately, apparently you weren't.
Yeah.
No, it is that the PAO, there's if we're looking for something that has a reason why rates are going up so fast, it's because the utilities are spending like it's going out of style. The increase on the transmission and distribution side, the rate increases are almost 1-for-1 with increased utility spending. If there was a cost shift that was going on, the rates would be going up much faster than the spending because the divisor, it's just basic math. You have your total revenue requirements and the divisor would be shrinking. And so rates would be going up. That's not happening. And so we need to look at the place where this is happening. It's right there in front of our nose. The problem is that the political influence in Sacramento is is refusing to let anybody look in that direction.
Well, thank you. I think we'll end it here. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
sure. Okay, a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. We're interested in your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. Email us at john@slowclimatecoalition.org. Tell your friends about this podcast series so we can all grow together. Till next time.